Proverbs chapter 3. Let's go ahead and review by reading, starting in verse 1, these 6 principles that Solomon gives us in these 12 verses. First, remember God's commandments and obey them. My son, do not forget my teaching, but keep, that word means obey, my commands in your heart, for they will prolong your life many years, bring you peace and prosperity. Principle number 2, make sure that you practice kindness and faithfulness. Let kindness and faithfulness never leave you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. Principle 3, trust God, not yourself. Verse 5, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him. He will make your paths straight. Principle 4, develop the fear of the Lord, which means to love God and hate sin. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and shun evil. This will bring health to your body and nourishment to your bones. Last week, we were at Principle 5, give to God first. Honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops. Then your barns will be filled to overflowing, and your vats will brim over with new wine. Our principle today, verses 11 and 12, accept God's discipline. My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline, and do not resent His rebuke, because the Lord disciplines those He loves, as a father the son He delights in. I have mentioned to you the last 2 or 3 Sundays that I was wrestling with Solomon on verses 11 and 12, and to please be praying. And I thank you for whoever it was that has been praying, especially whoever was praying for me last Saturday night, and I'll tell you why in a few minutes. But anytime that I've come up to this passage, you never want to talk about do not despise the Lord's discipline, the Lord's chastening. What is He talking about? And remember, from the very beginning of our study of Proverbs, I said the key to understanding the concepts in the book of Proverbs, as it is in any of the books of the Bible, is to understand the words that were originally used by the person writing it. The Old Testament was written primarily in the Hebrew language. The New Testament was written primarily in the Greek language. And I talked to you about the Strong's Concordance and the different references that are number-coded, so that all you have to do is follow the numbers, and you can understand what some of the words mean. And so I said, well, Wilson, pay attention to what you say, and do some word studies and find out exactly what he's talking about. But you may know that this passage of Scripture is also quoted in Hebrews chapter 12. And go ahead and find Hebrews 12, because we're going to be there in about 2 or 3 minutes. And so when an Old Testament passage is quoted in the New Testament, look at the words that were used by the New Testament writer, the Greek words that were used, so that you can understand how they understood what the Hebrew writer was saying in the Old Testament. And so that's what we're going to do today. We're going to look at these words, we're going to take them apart, then we're going to look at the Hebrews passage that uses these 2 verses as kind of the key of one of his sections, and see what he teaches us about the Lord's discipline. The very first thing and most important, one of the most important things is that God disciplines His children. Now, the NIV uses the words discipline and rebuke. The King James says, my son, despise not the chastening of the Lord, neither be weary of His correction. For whom the Lord loveth, He correcteth, even as a father the son in whom He delights. Here is what I was going to tell you. The most important thing I can tell you today, I want you to write it down. I want you to circle it. I want you to underline it. I want you to put exclamation points around it. All these kind of things. And the blank is not long enough to do all of that, so you're going to have to do it out to the side. The concept is discipline. Put in parentheses, training. And then in big, bold letters, put not punishment. This is the most important concept that we need to understand before we go any further in our study. The concept is discipline or training, not punishment. Now, as soon as you heard me use the word discipline, you probably thought punishment. Because in our English language and in our sociological setup, we confuse the two. They're 2 totally different things. And God put our punishment on Christ at the cross, right? Christ took our punishment on the cross. He's already borne the punishment for our sins. So when the challenges and difficulties of life come, it's not punishment, it's discipline or training. Please make sure you get that. All right? The things that I'm talking about, it's not punishment, it's discipline or training. The word chastening that the King James uses has with it the idea of education. In fact, Kyle and Delish, who are like the Hebrew scholars in the Old Testament, actually translate the first part of that verse, do not be discouraged when you go to Jehovah's school. Oh, kind of interesting. It has with it that idea of education. The word correction means correct, to get you back on track. And the word corrective means the same thing, to make it right. And so that's why the NIV says, don't despise the Lord's discipline, don't resent his rebuke. The concept is training, education, discipline, not punishment. So please understand that as we go through this series. God is not mad at you, and when things are going wrong, God's not punishing you. Christ took your punishment. This is discipline, this is training. Now, as I said, one way to help understand an Old Testament passage is if it's quoted in the New Testament, see how the New Testament interprets it. And so go to Hebrews chapter 12. And we're going to start in verse 4. In your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. And have you completely forgotten this word of encouragement that addresses you as a father addresses his son? It says, and here's the quote from Proverbs 3, my son, do not make... Did you catch that? Have you forgotten this word of encouragement? When God talks about training us, disciplining us, the Hebrew writer says it's encouragement. And you'll understand why, because he says he calls you my son. Do not make light of the Lord's discipline. Do not lose heart when he rebukes you, because the Lord disciplines the one he loves, and he chastens everyone he accepts as his son. Endure hardship. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about the discipline training. Hardship, difficulties, challenges, disappointments, discouragements. You can fill in the blank. Endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as his children. For what children are not disciplined by their father? If you're not disciplined, and everyone undergoes discipline, then you're not legitimate, not true sons and daughters at all. Moreover, we have all had human fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them for it. How much more should we submit to the Father of spirits and live? They, human parents, disciplined us for a little while as they thought best. But God disciplines us for our good, in order that we may share in his holiness. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Amen. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. Therefore, strengthen your feeble arms and weak knees. Make level paths for your feet, so that the lame may not be disabled, but rather healed. Now, I told you what the Old Testament Hebrew words mean. This whole paragraph here in the book of Hebrews has several different forms of the same Greek word, and it's the word paideia. It's the word that is used in the training of children. And so, again, the concept is when difficulties and challenges come into our lives, we're being trained. We're being brought up, in our spiritual maturity, just as training of our children as they grow up. I'm going to go ahead and take the time to read this from the Message, and you just kind of listen. In this all-out match against sin, others have suffered far worse than you, to say nothing of what Jesus went through. So don't feel sorry for yourselves. Or have you forgotten how good parents treat children, and that God regards you as his children? My dear child, don't shrug off God's discipline. Don't be crushed by it either. It's the child he loves that he disciplines. The child he embraces, he also corrects. God is educating you. He's treating you as dear children. This trouble you're in isn't punishment, it's training, the normal experience of children. Only irresponsible parents leave children to fend for themselves. Would you prefer an irresponsible God? We respect our own parents for training and not spoiling us, so why not embrace God's training so that we can truly live? While we were children, our parents did what seemed best to them. But God is doing what is best for us, training us to live God's holy best. At the time, discipline isn't much fun. It always feels like it's going against the grain. Later, of course, it pays off handsomely, for it's the well-trained who find themselves mature in their relationship with God. Again, the concept is training, discipline. Get that fan on him. You go over and sit in front of the fan. So again, you can see that the whole concept here is training or education. Now, my son played high school football and coached high school football and basketball. And so when I think about discipline and training, I think about what he went through as a player and how he trained his team as a coach. In football, you'll hear a coach talk about embracing the grind or embracing the process. And he's talking there, and I heard a pro coach a while back talk about that. He said, we're embracing the process. He said, the game will take care of itself if we just embrace the grind. If every day in practice we do what we're supposed to do, we go through the discipline, we go through the process, the game will take care of itself. Brian used to say that he wanted the game to be the easiest thing his team did all week long. He said, I want the practice to be intense and hard and focused so that when they get to the game, it's the easiest thing they do. That's the concept. God allows and sometimes sends things into our life to prepare us for what's next. It's the training. If one guy jumps off sides, the whole team has to run. There's that process, that grind. Somebody put it this way, when the discipline comes, God is not getting back at you. He's drawing you back to Him. So, the concept is discipline or training, not punishment. Please get that clear. If every time something goes wrong in your life, you think God is punishing you, you're going to have a real hard time trusting God, loving God, praying, because you're going to think He's mad at you all the time. It's not punishment. It's training to get us closer to Him. Beyond that, discipline is a proof of God's love. He says He disciplines those He loves. And if you don't ever go through difficulties, you might check your sonship, your daughtership. He said it's a sign of God's love. Again, coaching, you'll hear players talk about He was hard on us, He demanded the best of us because He loved us and He wanted us to succeed. It's amazing sometimes. I see it happen in Brian's life. I see it happen on the professional level where players years later come back to their coaches and thank them for the lessons that they learned and the discipline that it instilled in their lives that prepared them for life. God is saying through this passage, I'm preparing you. I'm training you. I'm not mad at you. I'm preparing you. I'm training you. I love you. And it's a proof that you're a child of God. I love how the beginning of Proverbs 3, verse 11, the first words are, my son. God's not punishing you. He's not mad at you. You're His son. He loves you. And this is a proof of your childship, which is why the writer of the book of Hebrews says, don't forget the encouragement of that passage. My son. Now, why do the hardships come? Why do the difficulties of life come? And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the difficulties, the disappointments, the hardships, all of those different things. Why do they come into our lives? Well, John MacArthur gave 3. He said they're for prevention or correction or education. Now, I mentioned to you something that happened to me last Saturday night. Somebody was praying for me last Saturday. I don't know who it was, but thank you very much. Because I was, I knew it was coming up in a week, and I was still mulling and wrestling and trying to figure, watching me put a sermon together, you don't need to do that. It's kind of like watching the sausage being made. You just don't need to do some things. And I'm struggling and I'm wrestling and I'm downstairs with Donna and we're watching something on TV, and all of a sudden I get out my iPad and I check my Twitter account, and there's a tweet from Rick Warren. Join me now as I teach on what to do when God shakes things up. And I'm like, that sounds intriguing. And I click on the link and I start to listen and I say, excuse me, and I go upstairs. I don't know if I said excuse me, I just went upstairs and got online, and he was teaching on this. And there are times when God just gives Warren insight into just make things so clear. It's like, this is it. This is the rest of my sermon. And so quotation marks, okay? This comes from Rick Warren. I'm giving him credit. But it just kind of unlocked things on, the purpose for discipline. Why do these things come into our lives? We all go through them. A lot of us are going through them now. The difficulties, the disappointments, the heartaches, the heartbreaks. Why? What is it that God's trying to train us? What is he trying to teach us? First, Warren says he does this to inspect us. Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 10. I thought I had put the references in your note. I haven't, so I'll give them to you so you can jot them down. Jeremiah 17:10, Deuteronomy 8:2. Jeremiah 17:10 says, the Lord searches our hearts and examines our deep motives. Deuteronomy chapter 8, Moses said, God led you through the wilderness so that you could see what was in your hearts. He does this to inspect us so that we will know why things are out of whack. Sometimes when the difficulties come, we need to ask this question: what does this problem reveal about me? That's not fun, is it? I remember the first church I pastored, we had talked about, praying and asking God to show us our hearts, which is a very dangerous prayer to pray. And the next week, one of our brand new converts said, Pastor Ken, you said to pray, Lord, show me my heart. I didn't like what he showed me, So, it's sometimes the trials come to inspect us. I had a conversation with a very successful businessman, and he said, I know what it's like to make $1 million a year. I know what it's like to lose $1 million a year. And he said, I got to tell you, I didn't like what I learned about myself that year I lost all that money. He said, I thought I had more faith. I thought I had more trust. I thought I had more peace. He said, I didn't like what I learned about myself during the tests and trials. To inspect us. What does this reveal about me? So, when everything's going along fine, you never know. It's like, in coaching. If all you're doing is playing, schools that you're 50 times better than, you don't learn. But when you come up against somebody of equal or better talent, it reveals some things about you. Oh, we need to work on this, we need to work on this. The difficulties come to reveal some things about us, to inspect us. Secondly, to correct us. This is the Hebrews 12 passage that we're in, that he does this to correct us for our good. And it's also Job chapter 5, verse 17. Consider yourself fortunate when God chooses to correct you. Job 5:17. To correct us. The question to ask is, what is this problem teaching me? What is it teaching me about God? Andre Crouch wrote the song Through It All. And in it he says, if I never had a problem, I'd never know God could solve them, and I'd never know what faith in God could do. And through it all, I've learned to trust in Jesus. And I've learned to depend on his word. What is this teaching you? Long time ago, I heard Tommy Barnett say this: when you're going through difficult times, don't ask why, ask what. Our human tendency is to say why. Why is this happening to me? Why is God doing this to me? Why isn't somebody else going through this? But the question we need to be asking is what? What am I learning? What is God teaching me? I remember one time after Don and I had gone through some stuff, we looked at each other and she said, well, one thing we've learned is that God is always with us. Now, when do you learn that? When you go through some stuff. So what is this teaching me? Third, the challenges come to direct us. Proverbs chapter 16, verse 9, the Lord directs our steps. Proverbs 20, verse 30, sometimes it takes a painful experience to make us change our ways. Psalm 119, verse 59, I've thought about my life and I've directed my feet back to your word. So sometimes the challenges come to direct us. The question is, where is this problem leading me? Now, if I had a room full of young adults who were dating age, I would preach a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and preach a little bit to them, and because you can then make the appropriate application to your life. Sometimes, when you're a young adult, the biggest pains that you have in your life are over broken relationships and relationships that you thought you wanted to continue and they don't work out. And instead of asking, where is this problem leading me and is God trying to direct me away from that person, we spend so much time trying to rebuild something that God was trying to protect us from. And so, where is this problem leading me? This challenge to direct me, is it leading me away from something, away from someone? Is it leading me to another career? Is it leading me to another situation? Where is this problem leading me? Fourth, sometimes the challenges come to protect us. It's like a warning sign. Job 36, verse 16, God has led you away from danger. And the famous verse in Genesis 50, verse 20, where Joseph said, you meant it to harm me, God meant it for good. He went through some stuff. Sold by his brothers into slavery, lied on by Potiphar's wife, in jail all those years. He went through some stuff, but God was protecting him and preparing him for what was next. So the question is, how could this problem be protecting me? I learned the importance of a fever when our oldest child, Kimberly, was in second grade. She got what we thought was a cold. Took her to the GP in town, and he prescribed some antibiotics, and, didn't seem to be getting any better, still running a fever, and we called him, and he called in some more antibiotics, and, things just really didn't seem to be improving, but her fever went away. So we thought, well, good, the fever's gone, she's doing okay. But she wasn't doing okay. She kept getting worse and worse. And finally, we took her to a pediatrician. And if you want to know why did it take us so long to get to the pediatrician, he was about 35 miles away. And we'd already taken her to the GP in town, so we thought we were good. So we finally take her to the pediatrician. And that's when he says, I'd call an ambulance, but you can get to the hospital quicker than the ambulance can get here and get her to the hospital. And she's got one lung that's totally collapsed. She's got another lung that's half collapsed, and she's down to 25% of her breathing capacity, and you need to get her to the hospital. Now, I will meet you there. Oh, but she doesn't have a fever. She doesn't have a fever because the infection has overwhelmed the antibodies in her body, and the infection is winning. That's why she no longer has a fever. Oh. So fever's good. Yeah, fever's good. It means your body's fighting. Now, you've met Kimberly, so you know she survived, in case you didn't know the rest of the story. But how can this problem protect me? What is God watching over me for? Sometimes he just has to hit us upside the head with a ball bat to get us to pay attention. And we need to say, God, what are you trying to protect me from? And then he sends these challenges into our lives to perfect us. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 10. After you have suffered a while, he will himself perfect you. And of course, Romans chapter 5, verses 3 and 4. Rejoice in tribulation. That doesn't make sense, does it? But it does if you read the rest of it, because tribulation works patience, and patience works experience, and experience gives us hope, because we've learned to trust in God. So the question then is, how can I grow from this? What spiritual disciplines can I grow because of what's going on here? He's trying to perfect me. He's trying to train me. How can I grow from this? So the Lord, we are enrolled in his school of training. He has these purposes for this difficulty, challenges, discipline in our lives. So then, how do we respond when the challenges come? How do we respond when life... I wish I could remember the sermon, but the title just struck me early in my ministry. I saw a sermon that was called, "But When Life Tumbles In, What Then?" And the concept was, everything's going, but when life tumbles in, what then? How do you respond when life tumbles in? How do you respond to the challenges, the difficulties, the disappointments of life? The first thing he says, Proverbs 3:11, do not despise the Lord's discipline and do not resent his rebuke. The word despise there means to refuse. So don't refuse it and don't resent it. Somebody who's a lot more mature than I am was going through a bunch of stuff, and they said, "Chaplain, people say to me, 'Why you?' And I say, 'Why not me?' Everybody goes through it. Why do I think I should be exempt from it?" Again, a lot more mature than I am. But what Solomon says is, don't resent it, don't refuse it. C.S. Lewis, I think, was pretty accurate when he said, "Many would rather have a benevolent grandfather in heaven whose main concern is our contentment than have a father whose main concern is our character." Don't refuse it, don't resent it. Secondly, don't become discouraged. Did you catch the last part of verse 5? Because I emphasized it over and over. The word of encouragement. I'm still struggling with that. How is this encouragement? I mean, I know the theory, but when you're in the middle of it, it doesn't seem like it's much encouragement, does it? Don't become discouraged. Rather, third, learn from it. He says, our parents humanly disciplined us. How much more can we respond and learn when God, who knows what's best? I think one of the problems that we have with discipline is, again, the confusion that we have with discipline and punishment, and the fact that I would imagine each of us could give at least one or a dozen stories of times that we got disciplined by our parents or an authority figure for something somebody else did. And so we have trouble sometimes relating to God, and so that's why the Hebrew writer says, your human parents did what they thought was best. God is doing what he knows is best to bring you into conformity to him. So learn from it. And the passage from James chapter 1, the message, consider it a gift when tests and challenges come, because you know that under pressure, faith shows its true colors. So don't try to get out of anything prematurely. Let it do its work so you become mature and well-developed. People say, I usually don't, but people say, God won't put on you more than you can bear. And somebody said, I wish he didn't have so much confidence in me. He's got more confidence in me than I have in myself sometimes. Yeah, he gets real close, doesn't he? Learn from it. Fourth, trust God through it. God knows what's best. And the Hebrew writer says, no discipline seems pleasant at the time, that's for sure. Trust God through it. Proverbs chapter 20, verse 24. Since the Lord is directing our steps, why try to understand everything that happens? And just a couple of weeks ago, we were in Proverbs chapter 3. Oh, imagine that. We were in Proverbs chapter 3. And we learned verses 5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not into your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him. He'll direct your paths. This is one of those areas where leaning on your own understanding gets you in trouble. Because we just have this weird concept that if God is our God, then everything always ought to be exactly the way we want it. And it's not the case. So he says, put your trust in God. Trust God through this all. In all your ways, put him first. Trust in him with all of your heart. Don't lean into your own understanding. I don't know about you, but when I'm going through stuff, I used to always try to figure it out. He's always that why. And I'm learning, I haven't learned it yet, but I'm learning that usually is fruitless. Because now you might want to go through that checklist. Is he trying to perfect me? Is he trying to correct me? Is he trying to teach me something? But the bulk of what our energy should be on is, God, I trust you, and you're going to be with me through this. And as Job said, I can't find him anywhere. Job 23. I go to my left, he's not there. I go to my right, I'm not there. I wish I could find him somewhere, but he knows the way I take. And when all this is done, I'm going to come forth as gold. Trust God through it all. And then I thought this was really fascinating. I was going to stop in verse 11. But you can't stop when the next word of the next verse is therefore. Therefore, because this is what we know about God's training system, therefore, strengthen your feeble arms and your weak knees and make level paths for your feet so that the lame may not be disabled but rather healed. You know what he's saying? Help others. Part of the purpose of discipline is so that we can help others when they go through it. I told you the question to ask is not why, but what. Now let me add another word onto that. And who. When you go through the challenging times, instead of asking, why is this happening to me, ask, what am I learning? What am I supposed to do with this? And who can I help because of what I'm learning? And it will be amazing to you how much you're going to find, and you have already in your life, how you've been able to help other people who are going through now what you went through. Help others. Strengthen the feeble arms. Strengthen the weak knees. Keep the path straight. Help others not to lose their balance when they go through this. I was watching a while back a kind of like a behind the scenes thing on one of the professional football teams, and the team had just had a loss and they were struggling and they had lost their confidence and they were really having a difficult time. And one of the things the coach said to them is back to, we're going to embrace the grind, we're going to embrace the process, we're going to go back to doing what we know we're supposed to be doing. And then he said this, you vets help these younger guys out. He was talking to the veterans on his team, the guys who'd been around a while, who'd gone through some of that. He said, you help us out. You'll hear a high school coach say, you seniors, step up. Teach these freshmen how to do this. That's the biblical passage of strengthen the weak arms and strengthen the feeble knees. You're learning things as you go through this so that not only can you learn it, but so that you can pass it on to somebody else who's going through it. Because you know, and I know, that it's one thing for a preacher to stand up here and preach this theory. It's another thing when somebody who's gone through it sits next to you and says, I've been through it, and you can tell. And it's really interesting, in my work as a chaplain, it's really interesting. You can tell the people who've been through it and the people who just have theories. The people who have the theories come into this family in crisis and just start spouting theories. The people who've been through it come in and give them a hug and start crying with them, because they've been there. And it's amazing to watch the person in crisis react. They don't like the theory people, but they hold on to the people that have been there. And that's what he's saying. He's saying, you've gone through it, you're learning, you're being inspected, you've been corrected, and you're being perfected, and you're learning all this so that when the next person comes along whose arms are failing and whose knees are weak and who's about to stumble, you can strengthen their arms, you can strengthen their knees, you can move some of the trash out of the way so they don't lose their step and they can make it too. See, God never allows anything to come into our lives just for us. It's always so that we can pass it on. He wants us to not be a reservoir that stores it up, but a river that flows out to other people. And you will be amazed as you live your life, the number of people that you'll be able just to say a word to that comes from the experiences that you have that is exactly the word that they need to hear. God's not mad at you. It's not punishment. Jesus took the punishment. It's training. It's discipline. So that we can be who God wants us to be, so that we're prepared for what's coming our way, so that we can pass on to others what we have learned in the school of experience. And don't forget, he calls you his children, and he says, I love you. So don't lean to your own understanding. Acknowledge him in all your ways, even through the valleys, and he'll direct your paths. Father, this is a tough one. A lot of us are going through some stuff. And a lot of people who will be watching this are going through stuff. And we need you to be our teacher. We need you, Holy Spirit, to take the truth of your word and make it personal to us, towards not just theory, but as reality. That in the midst of the challenges of life, we will feel your arms of love around us. We will feel your strength. We will feel your grace. We will feel your protection, even as we go through the valleys of this life. So, Lord, may the truth of this passage sink into our spirits. May we not be discouraged, but rather encouraged, because it means we're your children and you love us and you want what's best for us. So, Lord, while we're going through the part of the time that does not appear to be pleasant to us, may we, as you did when you were on the cross, look ahead and see what's on the other side for us. And to realize that all of this is working what Peter called an exceeding and eternal weight of glory. So may we be encouraged in the midst of the storms that you love us, that we're your children, and you're on our side. And we thank you for it. Now may the Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face to shine on you and give you his peace now and evermore. Amen. God bless you. Thanks for coming out today.